right, let's get started. I want to let's talk about the schedule in next week. We're not changing anything, I just want to make sure we're updated. And that is, if you notice, next week on Thursday, I just have a review in there, which means I'm not going to be here, so you're not going to be here. And then Friday is your first exam. So Thursday is a day to study. I didn't do that on purpose, but I have to. I'm going back east, and I'm not going to be here this next week. So the next time we're going to have class will be 2 weeks from today. That'll be October 12th. So exam 1, it will be on October 6th. Will be a week from tomorrow. So everybody's with me on the schedule. So next Thursday, there's no class, no video, no nothing, because I'm going to be traveling back east. And then Friday's the test. Now, as far as the test goes, it's 100 questions. I don't do any essays or fill in the blank things because the computer corrects it and I don't have time to deal with you guys self-actualizing and telling me what you're doing. I just want A, B, C, D. That's pretty much it. Matching, whatever. So it's all those kind of questions, that you can just put on a scoring sheet. Well, in our case, for ExamSoft. And so 100 questions, and this is what's going to be on it. So here goes. Go to page 7. 7. Okay, I got a matching on there with all the different subcategories of pharmacology listed on page 7. Kinetics and pharmaceutics and whatever. And then their definitions, and you match the definition to the category. All right. Then up to page 12, the receptor theory. All the definitions are words, know what they mean. For example, ligands, agonist, antagonist, competitive, non-competitive, ED50, TD50, LD50, therapeutic index, therapeutic window, what did I forget? Up and down regulation, enzyme induction and inhibition. Read chapter 5, look on page 13. Chapter 5, it has to do with receptor concepts. And again, when you read, I don't want you to read the chapter to try to memorize it. Just take the big headings. Out of each paragraph or category in the chapter, just try to take a sentence away. This means this. This means this. Just, you don't have to memorize anything. Just kind of get a feel for it. Page 16, the types of bonds, which are strongest and less. Yes, learn that. Page 18, draw a dose response curves. Give me the 4 characteristics of a dose response curve, which of course are, I put on the bottom of the page there for you. Affinity, efficacy, variability, and slope. Alright, what else? As far as the page 28, what is up and down regulation, and on the bottom, what is the terminology for drug interactions, addition, synergism, potentiation, and antagonism. Page 28. Page 29, what is bioavailability? And then on page 30, in the next few pages, having to do with pKa and ionization. just be able to answer those problems I gave you in class. I gave you in here. Drugs and acid, and it's a PK, it's something, you know. You get the point.
Do you know pH of the selected body fluid?
I think I always give you the pH. If I don't, I'll say it's in the stomach, which means it's real acid. But yeah, I tend to give you all the information. So I think I did. I hope I did. If not, you can throw some of it at me. All right. So, yeah, on page 33 and 34, this is in 35. These definitions are out of chapter 5, and we didn't go through all these yet. We will eventually. But the ones that we did, just be familiar with what they are. Okay. Drug metabolism, page 38. The fact that drugs are metabolized by the cytochrome oxidase enzymes. 2 phases. Oxidation, reduction, and hydrolysis is phase 1. Conjugation is phase 2. And it happens in the liver. Some of this stuff we didn't do it yet. Bioavailability is on page 46. Then, on page 50, drawing of the breakdown of the autonomic nervous system, page 50. I'm going to ask you, what is the neurotransmitter at each site? Okay, pre-ganglionic, sympathetic, parasympathetic, and post-ganglionic, sympathetic, parasympathetic. And I'm going to ask you, what is the receptor at each site? Nicotinic, muscarinic, adrenergic, whatever. Well, there's 8 questions right there. That was easy. What does sympathomimetic mean? What is sympatholytic? Parasympathomimetic, parasympatholytic. There's 12 questions. All right, page 52. Signs and stages, yes. Kind of know the general signs and stages of anesthesia. I'm not going to worry about plane 1, plane 2, plane 3. Any of that mess, I'm just going to say, if the patient had an overdose, what stage would they be in? What would the answer be? Phase 4, right. The excitement stage is stage 2. So that kind of thing. I don't want you to memorize the gory details of it. It's not that important because we don't use ether anymore. I just want the big picture. All right. When do you lose consciousness? Stage 1. When you surgical stage is stage 3. You know, that kind of thing. So just kind of do that. All right. Now, for page 62, well, this is an easy one. Yes, learn page 62. You know that already, right? What is the ventilation effect, concentration effect, blood gas, ventilation perfusion deficits, so on and so on and so on. So all the stuff we talked about on page 62, from top to bottom, be able to figure all that stuff out. That's chapter 7. Please, again, I'm begging you, if I can do anything to you, I'll buy you coffee, I'll take you out to dinner, whatever you want. Just buy, or buy. It's in my brain. Just read. Thank you. Just read. Read chapter 7. All right, now, very importantly, on page 66, I'm going to ask you those 3 columns on the second table there. What is the MAC, what is the blood gas, and what is the oil gas? Now, I'm not a real fan of memorizing numbers. That's what books are for, you to look them up. But this, as you can imagine, is our bread and butter. We do every day. These anesthetics we give to everybody every day, and you got to know which one is which. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I think fortunately, you probably think unfortunately, I'm going to ask you these numbers, except for halothane. Forget halothane. But the 4 anesthetics, Evo, Iso, Des, and nitrous, what is the MAC, what is the blood gas, and what is the oil gas? So in line with that, then I can say to you which one is more potent, is so-and-so less potent than so-and-so, is so-and-so faster than so-and-so. So once you know the numbers, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so then that's 1, 2, 3, 4 times 3. That's 12 questions right there. What's MAC, wake, MAC bar, and all that too. Definitions. All right. Now, the figure on page 68, 69, 70, 72, 3 and 4, 75. All those figures. I'm going to put 4 or 5 of these figures on the test. I'm going to ask you, well, what do they look? What does the figure mean? What is it talking about? So, for example, you went to page 75, and I put this figure on there, and then I say, what is this figure relating to, or showing, or demonstrating? And you would answer the second guess effect, because I won't put that on the very top. I'll make you put it in there. Otherwise, there isn't a question. So you just get a point. I'm not asking you to draw them. I'm not asking you to interpret anything. Just be able to see what these kind of get. I'm trying to get in the mind of looking at figures. It's easier to read scientific literature, medical books, etc. If you don't have to read the words, you just look at the figures, make up your mind, and then move on. And it takes some practice. It's not a natural thing. So I'm going to do that. Okay, as far as nitrous oxide, what does, where was that? Oh, page 76 on the bottom. What are the issues with nitrous expanding gas spaces? What are the gas spaces you have to watch out for? Obviously, you need to know this. You go clinical, you know who not to give nitrous to. Bowel obstruction, pneumothorax, air embolism, etc., etc., etc. That's basic knowledge everybody needs to go ahead and give anesthesia. Okay, on page 79, learn the little delineations from Dr. Eger's breakdown of the cardiac output per minute to various areas. In other words, vessel rich, muscle, fat, and vessel poor. On page 88 and 89, I do pediatrics. And the question is, do kids go to sleep faster than adults, slower than adults, whatever? And of course, you know already the answer is faster. And then pregnancy, that little thing on the bottom of page 89. There you go. Learn that, you'll have a happy pharmacology life. Like I said, I'm a believer, and if you want something to know somebody, tell them what you want them to know. Learn that, we'll all have a good start together for the first couple weeks, and then we can continue on. Any questions?
For the blood thing, you said just the perfusion as percentage of cardiac output?
Yeah, like the vessel-rich group gets so much weight, but it gets 75% of the cardiac output. Oh, question, yeah.
Are there more problems for the PKA that we can practice in the book, or do we just take those three that you showed us?
I gave you some on one of those days. Remember I brought the problems and I put them on the camera?
Yeah,
Learn those.
okay.
Trust me.
Thanks.
And then you can do the book ones too. There's some A, B, C, D in the book.
Okay, great.
But I focused on the other ones. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, question.
Last class you had mentioned that page 85 that we need to know that for the test.
Page 85. Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, page 85. I'm sorry, go back to that. I have a question on there. It's about 7 or 8 questions long, so good thing I talked about it. Would anesthetic, which of these will make the patient go to sleep blank? Faster, slower, or doesn't have any effect? And I'm listing all these kind of things. So in other words, if you have increased cardiac output, would that make the patient go to sleep faster or slower? Slower. If you had, and so on, all the stuff on here. If you increase concentration, would they go to sleep faster? If you decrease ventilation, they go to sleep slower. So just all these little parameters that would affect the speed of induction. I'm talking just about induction. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
It's tough getting old. All right, any other questions? All right, cool. Well then, yesterday we started with the next, so that's the end of what's going to be on the test. So the stuff we started yesterday and we'll talk about today will be for test 2. And this stuff is now effectively pharmacology of the anesthetics, and that's going to be chapter 8, I believe it is. I say 6, but I might be wrong. Oh, it's 6th edition. Yeah, it's chapter 8. Yeah. Okay. Well, yesterday we talked about a little bit about the history of the drugs, and I'm not going to reiterate that. On page 891, the structure, activity, relationship. What makes the chemical structure of an anesthetic do what the anesthetic does, and we kind of beat that to death. What's the mechanism of action? We don't know, but I talked a little bit about GABA. We're going to be into a GABA a whole lot when we talk about the IV drugs, page 92. And then the fact that the anesthetics work in various areas in the brain and spinal cord. In fact, they work in all the tissues in your body. And that was shown on page 94, that the parameters you're looking for in consciousness, amnesia, immobility, and analgesia all come from different areas of the brain having their depression. We started to go through the different compartments, starting with CNS, and that was on page 96. And we said that obviously the anesthetics cause anesthesia, that's loss of consciousness. They cause amnesia. They produce, my little bullets here in 96, dose-dependent depression of the CNS. The higher you turn the dial, the farther the stages they go through, the deeper they are, the more depression you have. That's dose-dependent depression, right? They decrease MRO2, intraocular pressure. They raise intracranial pressure because they cerebral vasodilate. However, it's very mild, and you can counteract it by making sure they're properly ventilated. I won't even use the word hyperventilate, but they're ventilated well so that they have low normal carbon dioxide, because even though they're depressed with the anesthetics, your CO2 still is the main controller of your cerebral vascular tone, whether you're under anesthesia or, of course, when you're awake. So CO2 still works to dilate or constrict. And we went through the figure on the bottom of page 96 and 97, and the fact that if somebody does have an issue with intracranial pressure, and they have a tumor growing or trauma to the head, traumatic brain injury, hydrocephalus, anything where there's pressure growing inside the brain. You can, with very just small increases in volume, cause a tremendous increase in pressure. And the anesthetics also depress the rate autoregulation. And those two factors mean you have to be real careful when you do neuro cases. And you're going to learn how to do those neuro cases from somebody. I went on to page 100. We talked about nitrous oxide and the fact that nitrous is controversial. Some people use it, some people don't. And you're going to learn all about going into anesthesia. And see, I think a lot of people, and I'm simplifying, but a lot of people, when they think of anesthesia, they think there's a book. Like you could go into the workroom and go to gallbladder, 40-year-old woman, and then they tell you this, well, do A, B, C, D. It's like a cookbook. And it takes a while to realize that anesthesia is whatever you want to make it. You work with 10 people, and all 10 people do it differently. And it all works. And then you'll be the same way. And that's what's kind of the fun of it, is you get to pick. You know, you don't have to do what everybody else does, as long as it isn't stupid. So, or at least as long as the patient wakes up happy. Yeah. So anyways, you'll see that it's a little cumbersome at first because it's not a simple, do this all the time no matter what. But then at the end, you find out that that's kind of the nice thing about anesthesia is there's a freedom to choosing the type of care you want to give the patient. Okay, page 101 we went through, and on the gas anesthetics on the top 4 there. Sure, blood flow going up, CMRO2 of course goes down with nitrous, that's plus minus. Intracranial pressure, nitrous again is plus minus, everything else goes up. And cerebral perfusion pressure goes down because your blood pressure goes down. And then finally, I think I left off with page 102, that with the anesthetics are cerebral protective. I'll show you on a different page. And they decrease SSEPs. If you look at the next page, page 103, and in fact, I'll go on the camera and point. Is it? No, sorry, 104. This is a table I took out of somewhere. It's from my textbook, but I stole it from somebody. Here it is. Best practice in clinical anesthesia 2016. The reference is on the next page. I asked permission. They gave it to me. I didn't steal it. And so here's the gases. Fluorine, SIVO, nitrous, and DES. And of course, inhalation anesthetics. Effect on SSCPs. Rub your chin, what do you think happens? MEPs, that's motor evoked potentials. This is where the technician is testing motor responses along the motor pathways from stimulation with his machine. And you can see that all of them depress both SSCPs and MEPs. So that's not surprising, they depress everything. So the technician has to adjust accordingly. Now, if you look at page 106, next page, 106, still kind of wrapping up from yesterday. This is, there's the reference on the bottom. This is from the Journal of Cardiovascular Anesthesia. And they're talking about the neuroprotective effects of the anesthetics. And there are cardioprotective, probably renal protective, and certainly neuroprotective effects of the anesthetics. In other words, there seems to be, there's toxicity in the anesthesia, but there's also protection. So they do some good things and they do some bad. And many people think that there is some neuroprotection and the patient's put to sleep and they have, surgery on the brain will be less susceptible to harm, And this is, if you look at the table here on 106, this is the mechanism of what they're proposing for the IV and inhaled anesthetics in the brain. And they gave all of these mechanisms for the reason that there's protection. I'm not going to, don't learn all that. I can't even memorize this, it's too much. But you can see that there are many different pathways in the brain. Inhibiting glutamate, stimulation of GABA, and inhibition of sympathetic response to ischemia, prevention of apoptosis. Apoptosis is cell death. It means cells dying. So the prevention from cells dying. There's an antioxidative effect, scavenger of free radicals. So there's many different ways that it's been proposed that the anesthetics can be neuroprotective, and they can also be harmful. We'll talk about that later today. But I wanted to show you this, some of the proposed ways that they're protective. Okay, so I think that's kind of where we left off for yesterday. So let's forward on. Page 107. All right, next category is cardiovascular, an obvious very important area for us. And to talk about the cardiovascular effects of the anesthetics, obviously they're going to do what? Depress, right? They're going to make your blood pressure go down. And we already saw that the deeper you go through stage 1, 3, 4, etc., the lower your blood pressure goes. So we can get the patient as deep as we want and make their blood pressure go pretty much wherever we want, within reason. We control the patient's pressure. You'll see that we can do that for the most part. But the question is why? Why does the blood pressure go down? So if you look on page 107, on the top, I wrote this out. This is my own thing, right? Mechanisms for decreasing blood pressure. But I would never steer you wrong. These are correct. If you think about how can a drug make your blood pressure go down, there's only 5 possible ways that we know of that can cause blood pressure to go down. Number 1, it can cause CNS depression. You depress the brain, vasomotor centers in the brain, brainstem, and the blood pressure can go down. It's pretty straightforward, right? Anesthetics certainly do that. You can directly depress the heart muscle, direct cardiac depression, and the anesthetics certainly do that. You can decrease systemic vascular resistance. In other words, you can cause vasodilation, and the anesthetics certainly do that because they relax vessels and you vasodilate. Number 4, you can depress your baroreceptors. Baroreceptors are your pressure receptors in your carotids and the aortic arch, and they control, it's the set point for your pressure. They sense blood pressure in your aorta and your carotids for your head and periphery, and then they tell the blood pressure to go up or down accordingly. So they're like the thermostat for temperature. The baroreceptors are for pressure. They're pressure receptors. And anesthetics depress them. So you lose a little bit of your automatic set point. Then finally, there's release of many different hormones. There can be a lot of things that depress blood pressure. Renin, vasopressin, there's a lot of hormones that affect catecholamines, all affect pressure in some direct or indirect way, and you can depress those or cause a release of ones that are depressants. So there can just be chemical or hormonal release that can affect your pressure. So these are the only 5 ways I know of in the human body to affect pressure. And you're going to see when we go through each category of drugs, next the IV anesthetics, then the narcotics, then the relaxants, and et cetera, we're going to go back through these 5 mechanisms. Sometimes 2 of the mechanisms are in play. The other 3 have nothing to do with it. Sometimes only 1 mechanism is in play. As far as the inhalation anesthetics, all 5 mechanisms happen. Anesthetics cause CNS depression, cardiac depression, baroreceptor depression, vasodilation, and they depress the release of blood pressure supportive hormones like catecholamines, renin, vasopressin, all kinds of hormones in your body. They're depressed. So now if somebody asks you when you go into clinical, oh, the blood pressure is low, why do you think that is? Use number 1, number 2. There you go, there's your answer. Okay, does it make sense? All anesthetics exhibit all 5 mechanisms I'm reading on my page here, of course, except nitrous oxide, because nitrous oxide isn't strong enough to do any of that stuff. When you give somebody nitrous oxide, 70%, their blood pressure stays exactly the same. Everything except nitrous oxide. Okay, so that's easy. Now, the next thing, I got to tell you this story. Don't write. When halothane was around, there was a phenomenon that would occur. Well, first of all, for those that have spent, let's say this. If you haven't spent a lot of time in surgery, for a lot of procedures that are in the vascular areas of the body, head and neck, face, plastics, nasal, ENT docs doing septum surgery, sometimes OB/GYN, they're doing vaginal surgery. The cervix is very vascular, they'll inject that. Neurosurgeons do the scalp. You know, the scalp will bleed like crazy. You get a little tiny cut in your scalp, it looks like you're going to bleed to death, and then you wash it all up, and you got a thing about that big on the top. Because it's so vascular in your scalp area. So there's a lot of areas of the body, my point is, that we operate on that are very vascular, and they bleed a lot. And that's annoying to surgeons. So what they do is they inject epinephrine into the incisional area before they start the case, and then they cut, and then because of the vasoconstriction you get from the epinephrine, then there's not as much bleeding. It's very common in surgery. Every day you'll do that for certain cases. And since you might as well, they usually use local anesthetic with epi in it, because this way it gives some local in the area, and then you don't have to give as much anesthesia, and everybody's happy. So you're going to see what we call the surgeon's injecting. The surgeon will say, anesthesia, I'm injecting. That's the word they'll use. They won't say what, who, what, where, how, whatever. But we already know kind of what's going on. And many times the scrub nurse will show you the bottle of the local anesthetic and epi so that you can chart it. See, whenever, I should even go back further, whenever a medicine of any kind is given to the patient, we have to record it, even if we don't give it. If the surgeon gives it, the scrub nurse doesn't give it, but she gives it to the surgeon to give. It's our responsibility. See, legally, we took the patient's ability to take care of themselves away. I put them to sleep. Therefore, I'm accepting the responsibility for anything that happens to that patient while they're asleep. That's the way the world works, like it or not. So anything the surgeon does, it's my butt. So we have to chart it. Surgeon injected 7 mLs of 1% lidocaine with 1 to 100,000 epinephrine at 9:22 to the incisional area. I have to put it on my chart. Or whatever, you have to kind of just do it. And then this is routine surgical practice, and the surgeons all know it, and we all know it, and then it works out fine. Okay. Now, back to this. When we used to use halothane anesthesia, you'll see, I'll talk a little bit about it later today probably, if not the next time I see you. But halothane had a very unique property, and we still don't know why it happened, was that everybody used this terminology. It sensitized the myocardium to catecholamines. That's the words you'll read in every anesthesia book. Sensitizes the heart, or sensitizes the myocardium to catecholamines. And what it was this. You think about somebody under anesthesia. Do you think anesthesia in general, this is an easy question, would be arrhythmogenic or antiarrhythmic? If I put someone to sleep, are they going to have more arrhythmias or less? Probably less, right. Why? Because the heart's suppressed, right? You put everything to sleep. They're not likely to have more. You're going to have patients, you put them on the table, they have PVCs every once in a while, nothing, pathological, but they just throw a few here and there. Put them to sleep, their heart's just nice and steady. Wake them up, they go back to what they were doing before. Because the cardio, anytime you depress the heart, that's antiarrhythmic, right? So it was very odd effect for an anesthetic to make the heart more sensitive, not less. More arrhythmogenic, not less. And so when we say it was more sensitive to catecholamines, when you put someone to sleep and then injected the epinephrine in the area of the skin or the neck or the scalp or wherever, the patient would have more arrhythmias than they would have if they were awake getting injected. We never could figure out why. It's annoying. So the surgeon injects, the next thing you know, the heart rate's 120, and there's PVCs in the VTAC, and I'm just trying to chart. You can do all this. It's 8:30 in the morning. I haven't had my coffee yet. I already got to deal with all this stuff, So it was always an issue. So again, we said, we used to, and you'll see it in all the books, halothane sensitized the myocardium to catecholamines. So when we inject catecholamines, epinephrine, for the incisional area, then the heart would all of a sudden get tachycardic and throw PVCs and all this nastiness, right? So we went to the laboratory and through a lot of research and anecdotal stuff clinically and so on, we came up with what we considered to be safe concentrations of epi. In other words, if you didn't give any more than this, then you were not likely to get arrhythmias that mattered. Maybe the heart rate will go up a little bit when you first inject. You get what's called an epinephrine flash. When you first put epi into anywhere in the body, this happens in the dentist all the time. When the dentist numbs your gums and all that, then people get kind of nervous for 5 or 10 minutes. It's that epi being absorbed, and they get tachycardic and diaphoretic, and of course they hate dentists anyways. So the patient may get a little increase in pressure, a little tachycardia, but they shouldn't get arrhythmias if you stay below these safe amounts. So we learned. I have them written here. We're going to go through it. Now we don't use halothane anymore, and the other anesthetics don't do it. They don't sensitize the myocardium. But we figured if these numbers are good in the worst case scenario, then let's just use them for everything. Right? So if something is safer, that's great. But let's not all of a sudden start giving all kinds of epi just because it's safer. Let's still stick to these more restrictive amounts, because we know that they're safe under the worst case scenario, then they're going to be safe for the current anesthetics. Now, in kids where we do a lot of injecting, they're taking tonsils out, they're going to inject both tonsils before they yank them and so on. Then we use SIVO. It's exclusively used for pediatric anesthesia for reasons we'll talk about. And so SIVO does not sensitize the myocardium to catecholamines, but we're still going to use only these amounts. And the surgeons know these amounts. Everybody's on the board of the same, the surgeons want the patient to be safe too. Even though they try to push it up to the top limits, overall the surgeon, it's his patient or her patient, and they are certainly concerned about their safety. So everybody's on board with this. This is common knowledge. So let's go through it. Now, my bullet number 2 here on page 107. Halothane sensitized the myocardium to the effect of catecholamines. So this is what we came up with, and we've used this for 30 years. Can't give any epi no stronger than 1 to 100,000 strength. And 1 to 100,000 strength means 0.01 milligrams per ml. That's what 1 to 100,000 is. 0.01 milligrams per ml. Right? When you're doing a cardiac arrest and you want to inject epi in a dead guy, you get one of those boxes out of a crash cart, How much epi is that? 1 milligram, right. So we're saying you want to use, that's 1 to 1,000 epi. This is 1 to 100,000 epi. So it's 0.01 milligram per ml. And you can't give any more than 10 mLs in any 10-minute period, which if you do 10 times 0.01, that equals 0.1. See, I put it in parentheses there. Or a total of 30 mLs per hour. Now, if the surgeons, let's say they're doing head and neck surgery. The patient's got a cancer, head and neck cancer. They want to do inject a large area of the neck. Well, they may want to get up more than 10 ml. They want to give a lot of volume, get a big area. Well, then they can just cut the concentration in half. Instead of using 1 to 100,000, use 1 to 200,000. Then you can give 20 mLs. See what I'm saying? So you can use the volume you need by messing with the concentration. So let me say it again. I have it written right there. You're going to memorize this. I'm going to ask you to test. Everybody you work with in the OR is going to ask you this. And your eyes have to go glassy. And you just, like a robot, and you spit these numbers out. And you'll have a nice life. If you don't know them, they're going to be calling my phone, going, so-and-so doesn't know the dose of... It's like, okay. Here we go. No more than 100,000 strength, no more than 10 mLs in a 10-minute period or 30 mLs per hour. That's pretty simple. Other way to say that, I'm just going to use a milligram per ml instead. No more, stronger than 0.01 milligrams per ml, and don't give any more than 0.1 milligram per 10-minute period, 0.3 milligrams per hour. Sometimes they inject the skin, then when they cut in, get deeper, they want to inject again a little deeper so there's less blood loss, and that's fine. That's why they say 30 mLs per hour. Sometimes they'll inject, make the incision, 5 or 10 minutes later they're going to inject again. Let's take it in farther in. So no more than 30 mLs per hour. Now for me, I did this for you here. Remember, I'm reading on page 107. 1 to 100,000 epi is a milligram per ml. 1 to 10,000 is 0.1. 1 to 100,000 is 0.01. 1 to 200,000 is 0.005. Other textbooks might tell you that, some books I know, they just say this. Don't use any more than 10 mics per kilo. 10 mics per kilo. All right, that's going to be the same as my little thing. Either way. Okay, does everybody get what I'm saying? Okay. I'll share you some figures about this later on. Okay, let's do one more and we'll take a break. The next bullet is anesthesia preconditioning. And so I'm going to tell you this story done right. Just listen. There's a phenomenon in the heart, physiological phenomenon, well defined. That's called ischemic preconditioning. Here's what happens. If you have an ischemic event in the heart, you get angina, and you get some part of the heart that doesn't get enough blood flow, then the heart tries to help out or fight against that. And many different molecular changes occur. There's changes in blood flow that shunts blood from the areas that are well perfused to areas that are getting ischemic. It tries to take from the good areas and send it to the bad areas. There is sequestration of calcium, so the calcium doesn't get into the muscle and cause problems. And there's a whole series of chemical things that occur. And they call it ischemic preconditioning. So for example, we do this in animal studies and so on, and it's well defined in humans. Let's say somebody has an ischemic attack. Then the blood flow goes back to normal. So they have angina, they pop their nitro, then their heart goes back to normal. for a period of about 12 to 14 hours maybe after that ischemic attack, the heart stands guard. It makes these changes to make sure that if it comes again, there's ischemia again, it's ready. And it won't be so susceptible the second time around. That's called preconditioning, the ischemic preconditioning. That the ischemia has caused the heart to set up changes. There's changes in ATP and the release of adenosine. I could go on and on. Just trust me on this. There's changes in the heart that occur where the heart kind of protects itself, preconditions itself, in case there's another insult. If there isn't, then over the 12 to, some people say 24 hours, the heart will go back to normal. So it's a good thing. The heart's trying to protect itself against further insult as a response to an initial insult. That's called preconditioning. Now the anesthetics, if you look on my little bullet here on page 107, it's now been determined pretty well in the heart that the anesthetics do the same thing. The anesthetics mimic ischemic preconditioning. So the anesthetics are able to make the heart less susceptible to traumatic events, ischemia, or some kind of insult that may occur. They have a protective effect. So they call it anesthesia preconditioning. It's the same as ischemic preconditioning, but it's the anesthetic drug that's doing it and not an ischemic event. See what I'm saying? So the anesthetics do produce preconditioning. That's why the gas anesthetics are the drugs of choice, along with other things, of course. For open heart surgery, when you go in and do open hearts, you all will. You'll see that when we do hearts, we always turn on gas of some kind because it has a protective effect against cardiac insult. Okay, let's take a break. All right, let's get started again. Okay, so anesthesia preconditioning. The next thing I have here is on page 107, second to the last bullet, and that's this. Desflurane, among all the volatile anesthetics, can produce tachycardia during induction. So here's what happens. Let me give you a background. We hate tachycardia, right? From now on, you believe me, you're going to hate it too. We like people's heart rates to be 40. I'm exaggerating, but we would like that if we could get it. But we like nice slow heart rates, happy heart, nice and calm, decent blood pressure. That makes our day a lot easier. And you don't have to go home and drink. So anything that causes tachycardia is an issue for us. Because it could be a sign of light anesthesia, or it might be a drug effect, or, we have to do all this rule out, differential diagnosis. And what can happen is desflurane seems to produce during induction in a small number of patients. They say around 15% of the patients that it's given to, usually young, healthy persons, fortunately. Tachycardia during induction. So you're putting a patient to sleep with DES, and the deeper they get, the higher the heart rate goes, and that's not supposed to happen. So you're not sure whether they're light and they need more, or it's just a DES effect, whatever. You can get rid of it by giving fentanyl, which we do, but nonetheless, it's a little bit of an annoyance. Read what I wrote in my bullet here on page 107. DES, and to a lesser extent isoflurane. Isoflurane rarely doesn't. Can produce tachycardia during initial induction. It's probably due to respiratory irritation. It's more common in young healthy patients. There's about a 10 to 20% incidence, and quickly increasing the concentration is also a factor. So, here's what the research tends to show. That desflurane has a very The books call it pungent, right? It's stinky, it's irritating when you breathe it. And you can imagine when Des was, I'm going off on a tangent here, but when Des was introduced, because its blood gas coefficient was 0.42, everybody thought, well, this is going to be the ideal drug to do mass conductions, or to breathe patients down. Because it's so fast that the patients are going to go to sleep like nothing, like there's no tomorrow. It'll be great. But we couldn't do it, because every time you try to get the patient to breathe Des, they'd cough, they'd hack, their eyes would water. It was just too stinky. It is a very bad odor. And so it never really came to pass. Now, sevoflurane, which is slower than Des, sevoflurane is 0.6 blood gas, right? Compared to 0.42 for Des. So even though it's a little slower, it's very pleasant to breathe. You can breathe it, it doesn't make you cough, it's not stinky. It has a smell that people will tolerate, and you can get people to breathe and go to sleep, do mass conduction with, and that's why we use Sevo for that. So even though on paper, knowing what we know, Des would seem like a more logical drug to use to get somebody to sleep rapidly, it comes down to something as simple as it just stinks. It's harder to get people to breathe it. So, I mean, it's not real scientific, but it's the truth. So Sevo is what we use. Now, because Des is a respiratory irritant, let's say I take a young healthy guy or a girl that's going in to have their ankle fixed, and I slug them with propofol, down they go, and I turn on the Des, and I start bagging, and I'm going to push it up to maybe 9% during induction, and then I'll back down to the MAC, or lower concentrations after that. So if you take the dial and you say went to 4% and gave them 2 or 3 breaths and then went to 9%, it seems that if you push that concentration up too fast, it introduces so much gas into them all at once that it causes a violent reaction against it. They cough, they hack, and since they're under with propofol, they're not going to respond physically, they're just laying still. But what you see then is they get tachycardic, and that's probably what's causing the tachycardia. So the sympathomimetic effect, the release of catecholamines, is probably due to respiratory irritation from introducing the desflurane in these young healthy people. People that have, for lack of a better way to do it, say kind of a virgin airway, say they're not smokers or they don't have, tolerance to bad air, then they're more susceptible to breathing nasty gas. And young healthy people that are going to be introduced to this. So anyways, with Des, what they say is to put the dial up slowly. Put it up to 2%. Give them 3 or 4 breaths. Turn it up to 4%. Give them 3. So over the minute or two, slowly increase it up to whatever height you're going, to say 8 or 9%. Don't just jack it up on there all at once. It's too much for that gas all coming in there at the same time. Then you get less incidence of this tachycardia. See, quickly increasing the concentration is a factor. So, does that make sense, or see what I mean? So we refer to that as desflurane tachycardia. Now again, fortunately, it happens in healthy people, so you're not like worried about beating somebody's heart who's got a ischemia or something, and you can usually just give a little fentanyl and stop it. But nonetheless, it does happen. I just want to point that out. Okay, so let's go through and look at some figures. I'm going on the camera. This is just showing you in a drawing some of the stuff we're talking about. So these are the blood pressure effects of the anesthetics. So this is mean arterial pressure. 0 means whatever you started at pre-op that took your pressure. If it was 140/90, then that would be the point at which is 0. And then how much it fluctuates from what you started with is here, and this is with increasing max of the various agents. What do you see? This one's pretty simple, right? Deeper you go, the lower your pressure goes. The higher you turn the dial on, the lower they can get the pressure to be. Right? This is fluorine, SIVO, ISO, and halotene. They're all making your pressure go down in a dose-dependent manner. Why is your pressure going down? I may ask you. And you're going to answer me what? CNS depression, myocardial depression, baroreceptor depression, vasodilation, and depression of cardiac hormones, or substances that support the cardiovascular system. All right, there's another one. This one's got nitrous in there. So here's increasing max, percent change in blood pressure, and what do you see with nitrous oxide? Now you can't get up this high unless you put them in a pressure chamber. This is probably animals. Oh, this is healthy volunteers, look at that. Nitrous did what? No change in pressure. All the rest, down, 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 down. So all the anesthetics, let's take a take-home message from this page. All the anesthetics produce a dose-dependent decrease in blood pressure except for nitrous oxide. Everybody with me on that? Here's heart rate. Percent change in heart rate from where you started with increasing max. This is comparing DES, ISO, and SIVO. And what do you see? DES causes tachycardia, right? Here's where you started at 1.5 Mach. It's 40% higher. There's DES-fluorine tachycardia. Next page, 110. This is vasodilation. This is your vascular resistance. And they're looking at the top one. There's halotene, we don't care. There's SIVO, DES, and ISO. And what do you see? This is percent change in your SVR from control. Increases doses of the gases. And your vascular resistance goes down, dose dependent. Yes?
I just want to clarify, when it says like 1.5 Mach, 2 Mach, is that just the Mach, or is that like 1.5 times the normal Mach of each drug?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's 1.5 times the normal Mach. And they do it this way, and it's a nice observation. I'm sorry I didn't point it out. Let's say they say 1 Mach of SIVO, DES, and isoflurane. Well, that's a different dose of each one, right? 1 Mach of SIVO is 2%, 1 Mach of DES, and an hour. So instead of saying, see, they can't really put 2%, 5%, whatever, because the Machs, they're different potencies. So they normalize for potency by just using this. So yes, 1.5 Mach is 1 of SIVO would be 3%. Because Mach is 2%. 1.5 times the Mach is 3%. 2 times the Mach would be 4%. So yes. So there's a dose-dependent decrease or vasodilation. The deeper you get, the more your SVR goes down. And the bottom one is the same thing, but I put this one in here to show you nitrous oxide, which doesn't do anything again. All the rest go down. So my take-home message from this page is the same. The anesthetics all cause vasodilation, except nitrous oxide. They do it in a dose-dependent manner. All right, page 111. Oh, this is exciting. Here's a dose-response curve. Percent of the patients exhibiting ventricular extrasystoles, how many patients have thrown PVCs, versus increasing amounts, dose, of epi on a mic per kilo basis. So this is sensitizing the myocardium. This is giving epi to the patient and seeing if they throw arrhythmias. And what do you see? Well, there's halotene, And I would say the ED50, or in this case would be TD50 for this effect, if I eyeball it, would be a little over 2 mics. See how I did that? TD50 would be about here. And for the other drugs, it's much higher, right? They're not even going up here until you get way over here somewhere. So I guess the whole point of this is, let's see what this said. Cumulative plots representing the dose of sub-Q epinephrine required to produce arrhythmias in normal capnic patients receiving quarter mac of halothane, ethane, fluorine, SIBO, or DES. So halothane sensitizes the myocardium, the other ones don't. Now on the bottom is a table that I'm kind of summarizing here. I took this out of my chapter 8. And so this. Cardiac effects of the anesthetics agents. Cardiac output goes down a little bit with fluorine, and DES and SIBO. It doesn't go down as much because they vasodilate and it helps maintain it, but they will go down eventually. And nitrous oxide just a little bit. Systemic vascular resistance, they all go down. Nitrous seems to make you constrict a little bit. So I put a little tiny arrow up. Our pressure goes down with all of them except for nitrous, and the heart rate goes up with DES and isoflurane. SIBO, no effect. Nitrous, a little bit of tachycardia. Okay. All right, next page, respiratory. Ah, yes. Respiratory effects. Well, when we look at the respiratory effects of any of our drugs, or any drugs, this is what we ask. This is an anesthesia thinking approach to how do you talk about respiratory effects of drugs. We want to know two things. Are they respiratory stimulants? Almost never. Or respiratory depressants? Almost always, because all our drugs depress everything, right? So do they stimulate or depress? And 99% of the time the answer is going to be depress. And number two, are they bronchodilators or are they bronchoconstrictors? Or do they have no effect on bronchial tone? All right, we're very interested in that. Anything that messes with your bronchial tone, we're putting you to sleep. We don't like it. Very difficult putting asthmatics, people with COPD, anything with a respiratory system that's less than healthy is a challenge for us for obvious reasons. We have to keep you ventilated and oxygenated and control your airway. We don't like anything that messes with the airway. All right? Now, in general, certainly, anything drug that would cause bronchoconstriction is not going to be good. I don't know of a single disease where they say, well, if I could just make it harder for them to breathe. That's the ticket. That would be good for them. Right? It's not going to happen. So bronchoconstriction is not a desirable drug effect, right? It's an undesirable side effect. Bronchodilation we like. We like that a lot. But in many drugs there's no effect either way. That's fine too. Okay? So we're looking at respiration rate and volume, how are you breathing, how's it affecting that? And is it a bronchoconstrictor, bronchodilator, or no effect? So let's take a look at page 112. And, oh my God, I would have thought. Bullet number 1. All the anesthetics are bronchodilators except nitrous oxide. They relax your bronchial tree. They're smooth muscle relaxants. The bronchi are smooth muscle. So the deeper you get, the more relaxed your bronchi are. And that's a good thing. Now, if somebody's asthmatic, yes, I can give them desflurane, and if I get them down into stage 3, asleep, they're going to be bronchodilated. However, I got to get all that coughing, hacking, respiratory irritation stuff on the way down. You know what I mean? So then a lot of people will tell you, well, I wouldn't use DES in an asthmatic. And you go, well, I thought it was a bronchodilator. Well, it is. But you got to get them to sleep first for them to be bronchodilated. And they're going to get irritated and cough and not like. You don't want to irritate anybody's respirations when they have asthma. That produces bronchospasm. So maybe that's not the drug of choice. I would certainly use SIVO probably, preferentially. I'm sure everybody does. Nitrous, no effect. Number 2 bullet. All anesthetics, of course, cause a dose-dependent decrease in respirations, and you can have them breathing normally in stage 1. They get excited in stage 2. They go back to breathing normally in the beginning of stage 3. Then the deeper you put them, they go all the way down to apneic. Right? So dose-dependent decrease in respirations, except, of course, nitrous oxide. You can have somebody breathe 70% nitrous and it has no effect on respirations. You can't smell it, it's odorless, doesn't do anything to respirations. They won't even, other than they feel good, they won't even know they're breathing. All right, number 3. Desflurane and isoflurane are respiratory irritants, especially desflurane. May cause coughing during induction and emergence. And you'll work with people, say, I don't like to use desflurane. A lot of outpatient centers, surgery centers, ambulatory care centers, where you're doing these lumps and bumps surgery, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, in and out. They like to use DES because it's so fast. They can wake the patients up quickly. But some of the CRNAs are going to tell you, I don't like to use it because they cough too much when they're waking up. So it's going to be a matter of opinion, but it does happen. They depress tidal volume before respiratory rate. If you look at the type of respiratory depression you get from an inhalation gas, when you put somebody deeper, what happens is their tidal volume goes down, they still breathe at the same rate. So I can put somebody into stage 3, have them breathing if I don't paralyze them, and they'll be breathing 12, 14 times a minute, whatever they were when they were awake, but maybe only 50 mLs. Maybe that bag is moving like just this much. Then I have to squeeze every 2 or 3 times just to supplement to make sure they get enough air. That's the typical anesthetic gas. The opiates, narcotics, you're going to study those at the end of the semester, they have the opposite effect. They depress rate more than volume. So you'll get somebody narcotized with fentanyl or morphine or Dilaudid or whatever, and you'll have them breathing 4 times a minute, but they're sucking all the air out of the room. They're going really deep, slow respirations. You wait. 10 seconds later, they take another breath, and there's really slow, deep respirations. And that's how respiratory depression occurs with narcotics. Now, eventually, if the dose is high enough, they just stop breathing for both types of drugs, inhalation gases and narcotics. But it's typical patterns that you'll see that's very common clinically, that with the gases, the rate will stay maintained more than volume, and with the opiates, the volume stays the same or even goes up, and the rate slows down. Okay. Okay, then finally, page 112, the anesthetics, of course, in their since they depress everything, they depress hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction in a dose-dependent manner. This is why you get more shunting under anesthesia. If they haven't talked to you about this yet, people make more of a big deal about it than we probably should. It's not a big deal. Nonetheless, there is a physiological phenomenon. All of us have the ability to do this. Normal human physiology is when we breathe in and out, depending on whether we're standing, sitting, lying, front, stomach, back, whatever position you're in, you don't always fill your lungs up with air the same every time you take a breath. Some are deeper, some are not as deep. So there'll be alveoli that don't get air distributed to them every time you take a breath. And the body has the ability to shunt the blood to the areas, the alveoli that are getting oxygen in, and shunt blood away from the areas that aren't blowing up as much. If I lie on my side, my lung is down, the other one is deep in and one is up, then certain perfusion is going to change. The parts that are oxygenated better, that's where the blood will go to pick up the. It goes where the oxygen is. That makes sense, right? The body has the ability to shunt blood. We call the phenomenon hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. The areas that don't have as much air in them, hypoxic, they use the word, it's probably not a good word to use, but it's just normal. Then they get vasoconstricted and the blood goes to where the oxygen is. You're trying to pick up oxygen, you might as well go, to where it is. Anesthetics, of course, when they depress everything. So they depress this ability for the body to shunt blood just to where the oxygen is best. It shunts blood to where the oxygen is not as good anymore, meaning that the lungs are not as efficient as they used to be, meaning you have to give at least 30% oxygen every time somebody's under anesthesia, and that's why. All right, does that make sense? Let's look at some figures. Page 113. Respiratory effects of the anesthetics. This is looking at ventilatory response to CO2. So I assume these are volunteers, and they give them carbon dioxide to make them breathe. Then they give them the gases and see what happens. And you can see that their response to CO2 is less and less and less and less the higher the MAC of the anesthetic. So I can summarize this figure. Anesthetics are respiratory depressants. Dose dependent. Same thing here, let's look at the bottom one. Relationship between carbon dioxide and the different gases. So this is your CO2. Normal CO2 starting at around 40. Then they put people to sleep and they watch what happens to their CO2 when they increase the MAC of the anesthetics. This is nitrous oxide. What happens to the CO2 when they give them nitrous oxide? Nothing. It's not a respiratory depressant. It stays at 40, normal, right? See this, nitrous, right? What about the other drugs? Well, it starts going up and up and up and up and up and up because they're getting respiratory depressed and they were starting to retain CO2. See how that works? So the take-home message from this page is anesthetics are respiratory depressants. They do it in a dose-dependent manner, except for nitrous oxide. All right, page 114, renal. All right, this one's easy. You're going to see this over and over again. You can close your eyes and go to sleep and say this in your sleep. It's so obvious. All right, this is what happens when you give any drug that drops your blood pressure, including the anesthetics. Now, first of all, the anesthetics depress the kidneys. All right, so they don't make as much urine as fast. But they still work fine, and they respond if you give fluids, and we give lots of fluids and blood and so on during surgery. So they're a little slower, but it's not enough to worry about, and they work just fine. But here's the little thing. Look at the D, top of page 114. Let's learn this. All anesthetics except nitrous, of course, decrease your blood pressure. Therefore, if you have a lower blood pressure, you have less renal blood flow. If you have less renal blood flow, then what's the next logical step? You have a lower GFR. You're not filtering as much blood, the glomeruli, right? And if you have a lower GFR, then it's going to ultimately end up in less pee, lower urine output. Why? Because your blood pressure is lower. Lower blood pressure, lower renal blood flow, lower GFR, lower urine output. You'll see this again and again. Any drug that we give, lots of our drugs make the blood pressure go down. They tend to lower urine output for this reason. Very simple physiology, right? Step by step. If A causes B, causes C, causes D. So that was easy. Okay, the next bullet here on page 114 has to do with fluoride ion. So put your pens down and let me tell you a story. Very important story in anesthesia. There was a drug called methoxyfluorine, or the trade name was Penthrine, and it was out in the 1960s. I actually had a chance to use it when I was a student. I went to school in the 1970s. And Penthrine was metabolized about 70% of a given dose. And what happened was, a couple days post-op, over 100 patients, when all the dust settled, it started to happen, and then the CDC and the FDA started looking into it. And by the time all the dust settled, we realized that there was over 100, 130, I think, patients that they got renal failure as toxicity from Penthrine. But it was a different kind of renal failure. It was called high output renal failure. In other words, the patients would just pee themselves to death. They get renal failure, they couldn't concentrate in the urine. The urine was as clear as water. But it was just copious, liters and liters, over the first couple of days post-op. They coined or nicknamed the term Penthrine polyuria. It looked like diabetes insipidus. It's basically what it looked like. You know that, right? So these patients with high output renal failure, needless to say, went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out why. And what was determined was that Penthrine was being metabolized. The fluoride ions, that the halogen on the molecule, was being released, and these free fluoride ions were clogging up the nephrons in the kidneys and causing renal failure. And then the kidneys didn't work and the patients peed themselves to death. So the big bugaboo became free fluoride ion in the body. For good purpose. It is toxic, very toxic. As I mentioned yesterday, we know that fluoride ion is the strongest electronegative chemical in the body, or a chemical on the periodic table. And so if it's in the body, it has a very strong tendency to bind with certain cell components. Now what can happen is the fluoride ion, with its very strong negative charge, it can bind to cell membrane, and it causes the cell membrane to deteriorate and break open. It causes apoptosis, to use the right word, science word, cell death. The cell membrane gets broken open, the cell dies. And we have chemicals in the body that are able to act as antioxidants to try to counteract this. The main one is glutathione. And glutathione from the liver is one of the body's main antioxidants. So if you looked at these patients and measured glutathione levels, the glutathione in their body was zero. So they burned it all up trying to quench or scavenge all these free radicals that were being produced, the free fluoride ion. And there are drugs, acetylcysteine, that you can give to try to counteract this, but nonetheless, the point was that the patients got as high output Penthrine polyuria and died, and we weren't happy. So Penthrine was taken off the market, and fortunately isoflurane came out around the same time, and isoflurane had no metabolism and no toxicity, and overnight, literally, the world changed to isoflurane. And it became the #1 anesthetic and stayed that till probably just a few years ago. In some parts of the world, because it's so cheap, it's been generic, it's still extremely widely used. US, we spend a little more money. We use SIVO probably a little more because it's faster. But a lot of places still use isoflurane because of its lack of toxicity. Okay, so then we thought we were over this story. Then here comes SIVO. And SIVOs, as I showed you yesterday, it's metabolized 6 to 8%. And here, let's look at this figure. This is a study that was done. Oh, so here's what happened. I forgot to tell you the punchline. It was determined with the Penthrane episode that if you're free fluoride ion, if you have a small base level of fluoride in the body, we all do. This is in toothpaste, this is in water, it's in food. So you got a couple of mics per ml level, we all do, it's harmless, right? But if it was all, we had to memorize this and we had to, it was all the SSN test. If your free fluoride ion level exceeded about 80 micromole, you got renal failure. So we had to be very careful if we gave any anesthetic or you used Penthrane. We could only use it for a short period of time because the free fluoride ion level, we didn't want it to get too high because it was taught that once it exceeds 60 to 80, you start to see toxicity. Once it exceeded about 120, you die. And it was pretty true. They figured it all out. Now, here comes SIVO. Let's take a look at this. This is plasma inorganic fluoride concentration during and after SIVO. And this is in obese and non-obese patients. The reason they're studying obese patients is for what I talked about yesterday. Obese patients tend to reservoir or depot the drug, so they would have more drug in them than a non-obese patient. They would tend to then to metabolize more because there's more drug in there for a longer period of time. So their levels would expect it to be higher. And hence, let's take a look at this. This was SIVO in a non-obese patient here. And so they gave SIVO, and this is on this is 1 day post-op. It peaked at about, 40. This is an obese patient, and it peaked at about almost 60. Well, now you're bumping your head on the toxicity there. You get up around 60 micromoles. Always been holy grail in anesthesia, but that's when you're going to see renal failure. We didn't see any renal failure. None. Zero. They gave levels. They gave SIVO, and they pushed the levels even up to 70, 75. No renal failure. Never happened. Oh, I guess we were wrong. So all that stuff we learned, we got to kind of throw it out the window. Everybody was going, I wonder why. Where's the renal failure? Where's the renal problems? Well, then for a while we said, you better not give SIVO to anybody with renal disease because they already have bad kidneys, and then you give them SIVO, and then they're going to blame you for the fact that it got worse. So the FDA wouldn't let it be released for this reason. They released it elsewhere, as I mentioned before. Japan first used it for a couple years, then Europe. After many administrations, well over millions, nobody showed up with renal failure. Even though their free fluoride ion levels were 50, 60, etc. So I guess their theories were wrong. And we still don't know why. This is what people are speculating, right? It sounds good, I'm not sure it's true, but you got to come up with something, right? So here's what they said. Penthrane, the blood gas coefficient was 14. So it's tremendously soluble. It stayed in the body forever. I mean, days and days. Whereas SIVO, the blood gas solubility is what? 0.6. So it's in and out quickly. So even though you can produce, transient levels of fluoride ion, they go up and down fast because the drug's in and out fast. Whereas Penthrane, they lasted around for days, and the levels stayed up for days. So maybe it's there's a time factor in there as well. You have to have the fluoride ion not only a certain level, but for a certain level that is for a certain time. Right? Does that make sense? Probably. I don't know if it does or not. That's what we say. That's what all we know is this. Pantherine doesn't bother the kidneys. Now we've been on the market since 2017. We've had it in the U.S. now for at least 10 years, given it tens, if not 100 million times to almost everybody, and having a single problem with kidneys. So, go figure. That's my story. All right, next, page 115, GI effects, and this one is pretty simple. You get a dose-dependent decrease in GI function, but when the patient wakes up again, the GI function goes back to normal. And then number 2, I want to talk a little bit, since under GI, I want to talk about a little bit about the liver and toxicity. Halothane, I'll tell you a little story about halothane. I never ask you this on a test, nobody cares. I just want you to have heard it. You want to be a CRNA, you got to know these stories. You can talk about them in the coffee. Halothane was, at least in the 60s, the #1 anesthetic in the world because it was non-flammable. It's the first non-flammable anesthetic. And we use it for quite a number of years, and I'll get to the point. Patients were showing up post-operatively with liver failure. And we coined the term halothane hepatitis. It wasn't hepatitis, but the patient looked like they caught hepatitis. Because they turned jaundice, they got eosinophilia, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, all the classic signs of hepatitis. And again, CDC and FDA did what is still, to this day, the largest epidemiological study ever done. That was a national halothane study. They tried to determine what was going on. And because, see, the anesthesia folks said, well, I give blood like water in the OR. We're always giving blood. Maybe they got the jaundice from the blood. It was a contaminated thing. We were trying to come up with it wasn't us, of course, and everybody was blaming anesthesia. The surgeon patient turned jaundice 2 days post-op, halothane hepatitis. And I was like, oh God, there's lawyers outside, they're waiting for me. So it was a kind of a stressful time. The National Halothane Study found this, and I'll just summarize it. It happened in adults, it did not happen in children. For some reason, prior to the age of puberty, it didn't happen, or didn't happen to any measurable extent. It happened in women more than men. People with liver disease, of course, were more susceptible than healthy patients. It almost always happens, here it is, turn to page 143. I got it summarized here, page 143. This is what they found in the National Halothane Study. I'll go like a clock, I'll go around it from the top, I'll go clockwise. They thought it was immune mediated. Why? Because people got on the second exposure. You get halothane for some kind of procedure, you come back in 2 months, you get a second procedure, bang, halothane hepatitis. So, of course, everybody in medicine will go, aha, that's easy. First time they got sensitized to it, they develop antibodies. It's just like an aspirin allergy, a penicillin allergy, any allergy to a drug. The second time they were exposed, they had anaphylaxis, or the immune reaction. So it seemed to be immune mediated because it almost always happened on the second administration. So we used to have to ask the patient, have you ever had surgery? And if they did, of course they didn't know if they had halothane or not, who would know? But if they had surgery within the last 6 months, we couldn't give them halothane. So we thought that we might get this reaction. Females, more often, if they had experienced hypoxia during the case, they seemed to be more susceptible. It obviously was a genetic predisposition. Some ethnic groups seem to be more susceptible than others. Multiple exposures, of course, they have liver disease, pre-existing condition. We ultimately found out that it was one of the metabolites of halothane that was causing the reaction. Obese patients were more susceptible, probably because they were depoting more halethane in their fat. If the patient was enzyme induced, they were more susceptible, probably because they were metabolizing more and getting more of the nasty metabolite. Age made a difference, like I said. Kids didn't get it, adults did. The cutoff point was puberty. To this day, we don't know why. What happens at puberty? Well, I know what happens at puberty. But what makes a difference? Drug reaction, pre and post. If they had a problem with blood flow, or they had a history of allergy or eczema. These are all the things that seem to be associated with the development of halethane hepatitis. So, as soon as fluorine came out in the 1970s, halethane went down the drain. We never gave it to another adult again, ever. We used it exclusively in kids because it didn't happen in kids. And we used halethane from the 1975 all the way through the beginning of the 2000s when Zevo came out. And then we figured Zevo was even better, got rid of halethane. Halethane was too slow. So it was stuck around as a pediatric anesthetic for 20, 25 years. And now it's, now it's in a museum. So anyways, that's the story of hepatotoxicity and halethane. And the other anesthetics, again, as I have mentioned, are not hepatotoxic. They have no toxicity associated with them. So they're not all the anesthetics, nitrous, Zevo, and I'm sorry, let me start again. The anesthetics, nitrous, des, and isoflurane are only metabolized trace amounts. Zevo is metabolized 6 to 8%. Even though it is metabolized, it does release some free fluoride ion. There seems to be no association with any toxicity. I quit. All right. Next week, test, don't forget. I'll see you all 2 weeks from yesterday. Thank you. Is it Thursday or is this Friday? Yeah. Thanks. Good luck.